I don't get applauded that often, so I don't know how to react. Today I'm going to tell you two stories. The first is about how to enter DevOps when you're new to it and you're kind of small. The other is about me and how I learned to become just extraordinarily average. So first, hi, I'm Katy. I'm a developer advocate at Influx Data. I like to code, I like to play with my dogs, I like to dance, like everyone is watching, because they usually are. And I'm pretty new to DevOps, and I work hard to make sure that I document everything I learn, because I think it's really hard to hold on to a beginner's perspective. I know a lot of senior engineers in a lot of areas, and what they think is the beginning is still left me with a lot of questions. It can be really intimidating to be new to DevOps, and I want to do my part to make it a little less scary. And I'm really an expert in tackling scary things. This is my family. There's my older sister, my two older brothers, and that's down here, that's me. I'm real great. They look sort of sweet here, right? Like silly kids, and they are, but they're also terrible. And they're really powerful presences in my life. Each of them had huge personalities. My sister was kind of a tyrant. One time she decided that we needed to split the room we shared in half, and of course she gave me the top half. My brother Jake was an athlete and a smooth talker, and there wasn't like a sports ball he couldn't figure out, while I got hit in the face with every sports ball. And my brother Jared was so just like profoundly weird and sweet, and people just couldn't wait to hear what he was going to say next. And then there was me, and I was like, there. And my sister once said I was like a pet, cute but useless. And they were these undeniable forces, right? And all I wanted to do was just like be part of whatever they were doing. I wanted to like what they liked and do what they did. And this is the approach that I sort of took to DevOps when I started too. When I got hired at Influx, I was ready to code and ready to talk. Those were the two things I was pretty sure I could do. And then on my first day, someone mentioned DevOps. And it turns out we had a lot of users in the DevOps space. And I thought, well, that's OK. I'm pretty sure I know what it is. Graphic tees, basements, being on call, that seems fine, right? Then I thought, maybe I'll just Google it anyway, just to be sure. And it turns out it's kind of unGoogleable. I ran into more obstacles. Just 1,000 smaller Google searches of a word I hadn't heard before, until I forgot what I was looking for in the first place. I felt like I was trekking through Middle Earth. Like I had a goal, but there was so much between me and that goal. Because there's a lot of tools to choose from, right? There's so many tools. And each of them seemed to demand context that I didn't have. I didn't know how to decide what I needed for my projects or what the company needed. People seemed to like Kubernetes, so I thought, well, maybe we need that. Let's use that, right? It wouldn't be popular if it wasn't useful. Lesson one. I Googled every combination of DevOps best practices, and it was a lot. Because there's a problem with trying to use solutions built by global companies with millions of users and thousands of employees, even if they're the most successful models. Because we don't have millions of users and thousands of employees. We didn't even have the use case that the tool was built for. So I started to wonder, what does success look like in DevOps at a smaller scale? Was it even possible? And should we style ourselves after these bigger companies? I thought that if I styled myself after my siblings, I would be so cool. I could take on what made them titans. I could be confident and smart and athletic and witty and funny and skeptical, like all at the same time. But it turns out, if it's not clear, I failed. I failed to be cool on pretty much every level. When I copied my sister, I felt and looked very much like a turtle. When people looked too closely at me, I would just retreat into my shell, like, oh, I hope they don't notice I'm not her. They noticed. And when I copied my brothers, that's just a picture of us all being just prime assholes. I don't know what to tell you. I just wasn't cool doing what they did. So then why did I spend my time trying to make those styles fit? And why would we try to mimic DevOps strategies built for someone else, knowing from the beginning that they won't fit? So when I say average, I don't mean that I was boring, or normal, or even well-behaved. I mean I wasn't an anomaly. I liked Weird Al and Lisa Frank, and I did not like vegetables or art class. I don't think I was alone in most of those things, but for the longest time, I felt like I couldn't just like what I liked or use what I needed, because I was trying to meet these standards of the people that I respected the most. After a couple weeks at Influx, I realized I was doing the same thing. I was researching DevOps practices from Google and Amazon and Netflix, but we're a company of like 80, so of course they didn't quite make sense. They made me feel the same way I felt the time I got my head stuck in the armhole of my brother's t-shirt, real confused. It was dark, and I didn't know how to get out. The biggest and most innovative DevOps strategies are pretty impressive, and they come from the biggest companies most of the time. Big companies have database teams to monitor and collect data from their database. Big companies have network teams to orchestrate and monitor their networks. Big companies have a team for nearly every problem. But at average companies, we have to stretch our expertise. We have to make the best decisions we can, and that usually involves some trade-offs. Of course, the problems that big companies have are hard. But that doesn't mean that smaller companies have fewer or less difficult challenges. At Influx, where I work, we're small size, and we have to make really careful decisions with our resources. We don't have unlimited budget. We don't have unlimited employees. Time and money are still very high on the list of considerations when we choose tools and processes. And really, that's the majority of companies, right? The big companies we're talking about that we look up to are the minority. Almost all of us are trying to prioritize and compromise to make DevOps solutions that work for us. And it's hard to know where to start. For me, I started with insight. So my sister moved out when I was 17, or when she was 17, sorry. She's not that lame. She was 17, I was 11, and I had a room to myself for the first time in my life. And it was a little weird when her stuff was gone, but I quickly filled it up with obscure poetry and like potions that I made and dragon figurines. And I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, of course I didn't. I spent a year dressed as a wizard. That is not a joke. And now maybe this isn't the most average case, but there was time I needed to get insight into myself, right? This was time I needed to collect data and try some styles for myself. And insight in tech can come in a lot of forms too, although probably not hosting a fake WrestleMania at your house like I did. Still, we can monitor our systems from different levels: application, platform, infrastructure. And it's a growing trend, even among smaller companies, to use a combination of tools to do this, right? You have one tool for gathering logs, one for user records, one for your time series data. There's one for pretty much everything. And I don't know about you, that already sounds pretty overwhelming to me. In the first 2 months of my job, some really brilliant people explained a lot of concepts to me. But I felt like I was looking into the sun a bit. Like my brain was melting and my eyes were watering. And I didn't understand the tools because I didn't understand the goal. And I didn't get it until the first time I used a metrics gathering tool in this like sad, broken old Rails app of mine. And I just wanted some basic data. I didn't need refined or granular data. I needed basic metrics, like response times, response codes, maybe some database query times, right? And even that small amount of data was enough for me to improve my code. Slow queries, I can fix that. Slow load time, maybe I could work on my front-end skills, although that's unlikely. I could have gone deeper. I could have gone for like higher definition information. But it was so much easier to let the initial metrics guide my strategy forward rather than guessing what I needed and the tool that I needed to get it was. Seeing metrics from our applications, even at the most basic level, is so much more important than worrying about which tool to use. Because the metrics gave me insight, and the insight is what prompted my action. Use the tool that makes it easiest for you, and the tool that promotes communication. Because communication is the hardest part of DevOps. It's probably the area I've seen the most talks on, and the area we can improve in the most, and the area I've seen the most failures in. There are a few layers of communication. At the most basic level, it's me to you. Then, of course, we have between team members. Then we have between teams. And then maybe even between my code and the person reading it. And then maybe the metrics I've gathered, and then the person looking at those metrics. That's a lot of layers. We have to recognize that even with insight into our application behavior, if there's no communication, there probably won't be any progress. I'm going to focus a little more on the way our data should communicate, because human communication is a whole talk I'm not prepared to give. Other people are doing a much better job of it at this conference, so watch those. But we should think about the data and the metrics we're collecting in the same way we think about the code we write. Will the next person understand our intention? Will future me understand what current me wants out of these metrics? Sometimes we revisit code and we think, who in the hell wrote this? And then you're like, oh, yo, it was me. It's always me, in case you're wondering. Even if it's your code, probably me. If we're not careful in instrumenting our applications, it can cause more problems and a siloing of information. If I want to communicate with my coworkers strictly on Slack, if they're talking to each other with HipChat, then we've already got more tools than we need and less communication than we started out with somehow. And there's a bit of risk in assuming that others will know how to interpret metrics. So for example, at Influx, I deal a lot with clusters. And I might set an alert because I want to know when a data node reaches 50% usage. Now, 50% is not an emergency. But in my head, I'm doing some disaster planning. Because I know that if I have 3 nodes total, and each of them is at 50%, and then 2 of them get struck by lightning, then I have 1 node that has 150% usage, and I have no nodes. So an alert at 50% makes sense to me, because I know, hey, maybe I need to keep an eye on this. But if you're the person that receives the alert, and you don't have any of my disaster planning anxiety disorder, and you don't understand why you're waking up at 3 a.m. for a 50% alert, then we have absolutely no way to understand each other, right? Our intention isn't written into the data that we're collecting. So it's up to us to make sure that our intentions are clear. Someone without context can wreak havoc on your processes and your code. I've done it, and maybe you've done it. The small changes can still lead to big incidents. So the first time I came home from college, one of my brothers came to visit me, and he did something he'd done 1,000 times before, which is that he leaped onto my back for a piggyback ride. And he was agile, and I was strong, and it had never been a problem, except he had spent the past year really bulking up, and I had spent the last year reading. So it went differently than it had before. He bowled me over, and I slid on my face in the gravel at our parents' home for about 10 yards, like a sad toboggan. Like, this was a communication problem on so many levels. And if we're embracing DevOps, then we're embracing the idea that we need more communication. So the tools and processes we adopt should never stop us from sharing data or collaborating or building our cultures. After my brother smashed my face into the rocks another time, just for good measure, we had what we call a postmortem. He said something like, "I can't believe you didn't catch me." To which I responded with a string of expletives, which I will leave to your imagination. But this really isn't that different than a lot of postmortems I attended, right? There's a lot of disbelief and frustration, like, how could this happen? And whose fault is it? And that's a normal reaction. But moving past that into the communication, that's where discovery happens. And it turned out, given some warning, I could still catch my brother. But what I needed was, 1, an alert. This is about to happen. and 2, some communication about what had changed and how I needed to adjust, right? And since then, I have caught him many times and only fallen over once more. So, success. Optimization has no place when you are starting your DevOps journey. It is a black hole of perfection, and I believe in you. Don't do it. Because in the beginning, what we're worried about is insight and communication, and optimization is sometimes the opposite of that. It doesn't mean that you'll never have time for it, but it means that time is not at the beginning of your journey. Seriously. We should always use solutions that fit. We should prioritize our needs, and we have to recognize that our needs are different than the biggest companies. I spent years modeling myself after the 3 people I loved and respected the most, despite their torture. And it turns out none of them were a good fit. But what I did was I took the things that I liked best about them, and I made them the things that I liked best about me. And it took me years to become myself, but now that I'm finally using my own style, I feel like I found a solution to feeling like a poor copy of these 3 titans ahead of me. And you can create your own style too. Start with insight and communication, and let the tools you choose be a byproduct of that. Start your journey into DevOps in the same average way that I did. Because average isn't bad. Average means we're not alone. It means we can help each other solve problems. And it turns out, average is still pretty good. Thanks.